Hey guys, tonight we drift back into the stone-shadowed streets of ancient Athens, where the air is dry and the marble still holds the sun's warmth like a sleeping cat on a window ledge. Above you, the Acropolis perches like a glowing crown, its torchlight flickering against a sky slowly bruising with night. Somewhere up there, on a slab of limestone older than most empires, a lone owl cries out, not a hoot, exactly, more of a raspy exhale that scrapes across the silence. You pause. You glance up. You squint into the dusk and try to see it. Just a bird. Or maybe not just. Because here's the thing, in ancient Greece, people didn't always agree on whether an owl was just a bird, or a beaked omen of everything from divine approval to bad soup. You're going to hear about that, but slowly, gently, because this is bedtime. Still, you probably won't survive this reality check. Even in the most rational birthplace of democracy and logic, people argued passionately about whether a creature with googly eyes and rotating necks was a message from the gods, or just annoying. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're still awake enough to tap a few buttons, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing that scroll of sleepy cities lining up across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle forward on a quiet path climbing toward the Parthenon. The stones under your sandals are smooth from 1,000 years of feet, and the air carries a dry whiff of time and old plaster. A guard passes you with a nod, his bronze helmet tucked under his arm. The owl calls again. Same note, same rhythm, almost like punctuation. Above you, the olive trees frame a view that hasn't changed in centuries. And nestled somewhere in those twisting branches, an owl waits, nocturnal, sharp-eyed, and utterly unbothered by philosophical disputes. Unlike you. Because down in the city, people are most definitely disputing. One young man says the owl is sacred to Athena, and therefore any appearance is good luck. Another scoffs and says it's a bird of death, just ask the country folk. A third says it's both, because that's how myths work, confusingly. Historians still argue whether the owl's association with wisdom was originally literal, like, owl equals smart, or if it was retrofitted later, because Athena already had an owl and someone decided it would be neat to turn that into a metaphor. Your path leads you past a column half swallowed by vines. An old woman is lighting a clay lantern outside her home, muttering under her breath about how all cries mean tomorrow will be hot. She's wrapped in layers, even in this weather, and her sandals slap softly as she crosses back inside, leaving a trail of warm oil and garlic in the air. Owl lore, as you're beginning to learn, wasn't confined to temples and scrolls. It clung to the bones of the city, woven into lullabies, etched onto coins, whispered in arguments behind wine jugs. You step through a narrow gate. To your right, a cat leaps from a barrel and disappears into the dark. To your left, someone's drawn an owl in charcoal on the wall. It's wide-eyed and slightly lopsided, as though the artist had never seen one up close, or maybe had seen one too close and panicked. In the distance, another cry, shorter, sharper. The guard pauses this time and glances up too. Even trained soldiers still flinch when owl speaks at the wrong moment. So here you are, halfway up a sacred hill, surrounded by crickets, mystery, and ancient opinions. You think you know what an owl is, feathers, claws, creepy silence. But the Greeks, they thought it was something more. Not always the same something, but always more. The Acropolis looms ahead, bathed in flickering gold. The owl watches. And you walk on. You pause beside a crumbling bench of marble where two stone lions used to sit, though now only one remains, its face worn into a kind of eternal shrug. The sky is inkier now, and the owl calls again, this time from the darker treetops behind you. It's closer. Or maybe just louder. You can't tell, and neither could the Athenians, which was part of the problem. Because in this city of logic and gods and olives, the owl was tied to one figure more than any other, Athena, goddess of wisdom, war, and suspiciously well-sculpted armor. And where she went, her owl went too, not in a literal sense, maybe, but in the minds of the people, definitely. To them, the bird was her avatar, her little sky scout. An airbound companion with feathers, talons, and no discernible bedtime. You duck under a low lintel and step into a tiny square where the light spills from an open door. Inside, a family eats quietly, bread, olives, something steaming in a clay pot. On the wall above them hangs a wooden plaque carved with Athena's owl, head turned, eyes forward, wings tucked. The image is everywhere in this city, on coins, on shields, and etched into the base of statues that no longer remember who they were supposed to be. Still, historians debate whether the owl was always Athena's bird. Some argue it might have been borrowed, the way many myths were, from earlier cults or even Minoan symbols. Others claim it was chosen because of the owl's forward-facing eyes, unusual for birds and uncannily human. A kind of spooky gaze. Evolution didn't intend to be wise but was interpreted that way by Greeks with an eye for metaphors and a love of storytelling. You step out into the square. A breeze lifts your robe. Above, the stars prick the sky like pinholes in black parchment. The owl cries again, and you imagine Athena somewhere beyond the clouds, arms crossed, mildly annoyed you haven't figured out what her bird is really for. Down a side street, a group of children are playing a clapping game that involves owl noises and exaggerated head turns. One kid squawks like an owl, another pretends to drop dead. The rest laugh. Educational? Debatable. Entertaining? Apparently. You smile and walk on. There's something oddly comforting about how this one bird has embedded itself into every layer of Greek life, from myths to markets to mid-meal superstitions. The owl didn't need to do much. It didn't have to perform tricks or sing songs. It just had to exist. Be mysterious. Be loud, sometimes. Be strange. Which, let's be honest, is how a lot of wisdom actually works. You remember hearing once that owls can turn their heads nearly all the way around. Not because they're magical, but because their eyeballs don't move in their sockets. Weird, right? Evolution gave them wide eyes and then said, "Good luck." The Greeks didn't know this, obviously, but they did notice how owls stared, unblinking, unsettling, and deeply, deeply judgmental. Like philosophers in feathers. You pass a shrine, small and flickering with oil lamps. Someone has left offerings, coins, figs, a miniature bronze owl with a dented wing. A priest stands nearby, eyes half closed, lips moving in soft repetition. He looks up as you pass and nods once, as if to say, yes, the owl is watching. Whether that's good or bad, well, that's up to interpretation. Some modern historians point out that the owl may have simply been common in the region. And as the saying goes, proximity breeds symbolism. The owl wasn't chosen, it just was there, already hooting from the rafters when someone decided it must mean something more. But there's always been tension between meaning and noise. Between sacred message and midnight screech. Even today, scholars debate whether the owl was genuinely seen as a positive omen, or whether people just didn't want to offend Athena by saying otherwise. You wouldn't say your bird is creepy to a goddess with a spear and a track record of turning people into spiders. You pass a wall where someone has painted an owl with its wings outstretched and a scroll in its claws. Below it, someone else has added a doodle of a man running away, terrified. The combination is oddly accurate. The Acropolis is closer now, the steps ahead gleaming in the starlight. You hear voices up there, soft, echoing, scholarly tones. Probably a group of young thinkers arguing about whether an owl seen before battle means victory, or whether that's only true if it's flying left to right, not right to left. Yes, that was a real argument. No, they didn't settle it. You sigh, amused, and keep walking. The owl cries again, one long note, clear and high. And somewhere deep in your tired bones, you wonder whether that sound is luck or warning. But for now, it's just the night, and the bird, and your thoughts, feathered and slow. The stone beneath your sandals changes texture again, smoother now, flatter, as you step into the wide terrace near the base of the Parthenon. The breeze lifts faint wisps of dust and the scent of burnt oil from nearby lanterns, carrying with it that persistent, echoing cry. The owl hasn't moved. Or maybe a different owl has taken its place. Either way, the sound has followed you. Across the terrace, 3 men argue gently beside a column drum. They speak in that uniquely Athenian cadence, half philosophy, half theater, all conviction. One insists owls are divine messengers, sent by Athena to warn or bless, depending on context and the listener's moral hygiene. Another rolls his eyes and declares it's just a nocturnal bird, loud and territorial. The third, already halfway into a cup of watered wine, shrugs and says maybe they're just born screamers. You lean on a worn balustrade, and watch as a nearby cat arches its back and bolts beneath a table at the next owl cry. A woman, startled, drops a clay bowl with a sharp crack. No one's hurt. But the moment creates a hush, and in that hush, the owl's voice fills everything. It's that sound, you realize. That dry, rasping, back-of-the-throat yelp, not a hoot, not a chirp, but something closer to a protest wrapped in mystery. People react to it, startle at it, feel it. Maybe that's why it became a matter of debate. When something so small makes such a noise, it demands an explanation. Some records suggest that ancient Athenians were divided over what an owl cry actually meant. Was it good luck if it came from the west? Was it ill-fated if heard during childbirth? Historians still argue whether such interpretations were formalized omens or just hyperactive imagination fueled by sleepless nights and communal storytelling. You stroll past a fresco still clinging to a wall, barely visible in the dim light, but just clear enough to show a stylized owl perched on Athena's shoulder, eyes like moons. Around the corner, someone's carved the same creature into the base of a public fountain. It seems you can't throw a stone in this city without hitting owl art. Or at least owl graffiti. Back then, people didn't just hear the owl, they read it. Like a text message from Olympus. If it cried once, maybe a storm was coming. Twice? Perhaps a baby would be born early. If the owl called out during a political vote, the outcome was said to be touched by Athena herself. Conveniently, this interpretation seemed to lean whichever way the speaker wanted it to go. You pass a young man sitting cross-legged, muttering over a set of bones and cracked pottery shards. He's an amateur diviner, or at least he thinks he is. He rattles his tools like dice and pauses every time the owl cries. You watch as he adjusts his reading, muttering, well, that changes things, like someone refreshing a weather app and pretending they knew it all along. There's a strangely modern feeling in this mix of superstition and logic. A yearning to find patterns where maybe none exist. A need to believe that the universe leaves clues, even if those clues come in the form of a flying alarm clock with judgmental eyebrows. One story, popular among fishermen, claimed that an owl calling from the direction of the sea meant the gods were warning you against setting sail. But others insisted that same cry meant the catch would be bountiful. Arguments broke out in harbors over this, and more than one fishing trip was delayed while two gray-bearded men shouted about bird placement. You sit now on a stone bench near a fig tree, the leaves rattling like parchment. Another owl cry cuts through the stillness, and for a moment, you wonder what it means, not just in a mythic sense, but for you, now, in this story. Is it asking something? Warning something? Or is it just being? You exhale slowly. The stone is cool beneath you. The stars don't blink. The owl does not explain itself. People back then tried to capture its meaning in art, in poetry, in carved symbols on rooftops. Some hung clay amulets shaped like owls to ward off thieves. Others avoided saying the bird's name at night, fearing it might invite bad luck. You pass a narrow alley where someone has scratched a crude owl onto the wall alongside the words, "Don't trust it. It knows things." Whether the owl was divine, disturbing, or just a very vocal part of the local ecosystem, it clearly held a grip on the collective imagination. And maybe that's why the debate never truly ended, because the owl, by its very nature, refuses to be defined. Wise or wild, holy or haunting, silent predator or loud philosopher. One thing's certain, though, you're not the first person to wonder what it's trying to say. And you definitely won't be the last. You rise from the bench and ease your way down the hill, following a footpath etched into the stone like the groove of a needle through soft cloth. The owl has gone silent now, and in its absence, the other sounds return, crickets in the brush, sandals slapping cobblestone, and the soft babble of a nearby market winding down. But even without its cry, the owl hovers in every mind here. It's in the whispers, the sideways glances, the half-finished sentences. At the edge of the agora, the bustling heart of the Athenian city-state, you pause near a stall where a woman sells small dried fish and salted olives. She's chatting with a customer about, of all things, owl sightings. Apparently, her husband saw one near the well last week and declared the market would be prosperous all day. She beams. The olives sold up by noon. The man she's speaking to frowns. He says owl sightings always sour the catch, especially when they come just before dawn. He lost 2 baskets of fish last time it happened. They both look at each other like the other must be mistaken, or cursed, or simply from the wrong village. You leave before it escalates into an all-out feather-based feud. Historians still argue whether beliefs like this were rooted in localized superstition, regional traditions, or just day-to-day chaos given meaning after the fact. Like the man who trips on a stone and blames the owl he heard an hour before. Or the woman who attributes her sudden headache to an owl passing overhead during breakfast. Coincidence? Or beak judgment? You wander deeper into the market, where twilight goods are still being peddled under torchlight, figs, herbs, olive oil, and a few suspiciously worn statues of Athena, their owl companions chipped beyond recognition. Nearby, a young boy tries to sell small clay pendants shaped like owl faces. For luck, he insists. Or maybe to keep bad luck away. Depends on how you wear it. You smile. He's already mastered ancient Greek marketing tactics, uncertainty with confidence. The truth is, owl lore in Athens wasn't uniform. It wasn't even consistent across a single street. Beliefs morphed depending on mood, outcome, and who's telling the story. One merchant swore by owl sightings. Another swore at them. And both were equally convinced they were right. You step past a bakery shuttering for the evening. The smell of sesame and ash lingers in the air. A woman sweeping the threshold pauses, glances skyward, and mutters something about that cursed screamer. You almost want to ask her to elaborate, but she catches your eye and chuckles. Don't worry. It only hates bakers. She's joking, probably. A philosopher, seated on a barrel near a wine stall, begins reciting verses aloud to no one in particular. The owl knows the path unseen, yet shares no map nor mercy. Its cry is not a question, just the echo of a god's shrug. Someone claps. Someone else throws a grape. The owl debate doesn't just live in scholars' scrolls, it's in poetry, gossip, and the price of goat cheese. You reach the edge of the marketplace where a few stalls remain. One sells carved birds, swans, doves, peacocks, and yes, a very smug-looking owl. The merchant, a bearded man with more wrinkles than tunic, tells you his owl carvings sell better on odd-numbered days. Because of the symmetry, he says with a straight face. People think symmetry means balance. Except owls. They ruin it. That's why they're lucky. His logic is flawed, but delivered with such certainty, you nod anyway. It makes you wonder, what did you believe before tonight? Did you ever think about owls beyond the occasional Halloween decoration or children's book? Now, here you are, wondering if their call shifts the air, or if the Greeks simply needed something to argue about besides taxes and Sparta. A breeze picks up again, and in the distance, faint and distinct, the owl cries once more. Everyone in the market pauses, just for a beat. The sound rolls over the stones like a ghost brushing past your shoulder. Then life resumes, casual and unchanged, but never quite unaffected. You realize now how deeply ingrained the owl had become, not through decree or temple law, but through repetition. A story here, a whisper there, a fishmonger with a theory and a poet with a rhyme. A mosaic of meanings, stitched together by centuries of half-sure believers and confident guessers. Lucky? Loud? It never mattered. What mattered was that the owl was noticed. It made people stop, listen, and assign meaning. And maybe that's what makes something sacred in the end, not divine decree, but shared curiosity. You turn toward the temple steps, the marketplace fading behind you, the echo of the owl still spinning through your thoughts like a marble in a bowl. You climb again, now toward the older residential edges near the foot of the Acropolis, where the city breathes more slowly, less performed. Here, the polished philosophers and market shouts fade into homespun thoughts and quieter myths, especially the kind that begin with someone saying, "You'll never believe what happened the night the owl cried 3 times." A modest courtyard opens before you, ringed with clay pots and low stone seating. You sit for a moment, and your eyes drift to the soot-darkened eaves where, years ago, someone claimed Socrates himself once stopped mid-sentence during a discussion on virtue because of a single, loud owl call. The owl, as the tale goes, interrupted his thought just as he was about to deliver a particularly important idea. He paused, blinked, then smiled and said, "Even the gods enjoy a dramatic entrance." It's one of those stories that historians still argue whether it ever happened, or if it was simply crafted later by students who found the owl's scream more memorable than the philosophy itself. Either way, the image stuck, the world's most patient thinker, bested by a feathered heckler. You glance up at the same eaves. They're empty now, save for dust and a sleeping vine. But you can imagine it, Socrates, beard full of crumbs, squinting into the night, trying to decide whether that screech meant divine insight or just poor acoustics. Elsewhere in the neighborhood, similar stories cling to the walls like ivy. One house is rumored to have been the site of an owl sighting that preceded a philosopher's sudden illness. His followers said it was a sign. His doctor said it was a fig allergy. Interpretations vary. You rise and wander past houses still lit by soft oil glow. A child sits cross-legged in a doorway, rolling pebbles and mumbling what sounds like a counting rhyme. When you pass, she stops and asks, "Did you hear the owl?" You nod. "It cried twice," she says. "That means someone will trip tomorrow." She seems completely convinced, and you don't dare ask who. You just promise to watch your step. These little interpretations, you realize, were like daily horoscopes delivered free, via airmail. Not everyone believed them, of course. But not believing didn't seem to protect anyone from considering them. Further down, two elderly men sit on opposite sides of a chessboard carved into the stone. One moves a piece, grunts, and mutters, "Owl cried last night. My joints warned me." His opponent shakes his head. "That was no owl. That was your wife snoring." They both laugh, though one louder than the other. You pass a mural, cracked and fading, but still clear enough. Athena stands tall, helmeted, her owl perched beside her, wings half spread like curtains drawn open. The caption beneath it, in a flaking hand, reads, "Let the birds speak what men will not." It's cryptic, but you kind of get it. The owl doesn't argue. It announces, and lets others decide what to do with the message. A young man seated nearby, nose in a scroll, looks up just long enough to say, "Did you know there's a theory that the owl's cry registers in a frequency that makes humans more likely to imagine significance?" No proof, but I like the poetry of it. You nod. The owl makes people pause. And pausing, in a world that rarely slows down, can be profound enough to feel sacred. Historians today still argue whether Socrates took the owl seriously or not. Some believe he did. He referenced birds often, and once described a young man's logic as being as scattered as a frightened owl. Others argue he used the bird mostly as a literary device, more symbolic than sincere. Still, the owl lurks in his dialogues like a punctuation mark from above. You step through a narrow alley where laundry flaps overhead. A woman hanging a blanket calls down, "You walking toward the Acropolis? Owl cried that way earlier. Be careful." She grins, but it's the grin of someone half joking, half waiting to be proven right. It's oddly reassuring, how embedded the owl became. A creature that doesn't build temples, doesn't give speeches, doesn't wage wars, just watches, calls out, and leaves humans to make sense of it all. Or not. And tonight, as you stroll deeper into the shadow of history, it still watches. Still calls. Still waits for you to listen. The houses thin out as you continue upward, and your sandals slide slightly on the loose gravel of a sloping path. To your right, a torch flickers beside a weather-worn archway, casting long shadows that stretch like sleepy sentries. And just ahead, a cluster of small homes circles a fountain, its trickle faint under the hush of night. The owl calls again. Once. Then silence. In the countryside, just beyond these city walls, things were different. You'd heard stories earlier today, from a merchant carting figs and barley into town. His hands were thick with calluses and sun, and his opinions were just as hardened. In the city, you think owls mean wisdom, he'd scoffed. Out where we live, they mean trouble. Always have. Rural communities treated owl cries with more suspicion than reverence. They weren't symbols of gods, but warnings of misfortune. A woman hears an owl call at night, someone in her family will fall ill. A man sees an owl perch near his window, he'll lose a sheep. Or worse, lose face at the local games. You learn quickly, outside the marble temples, people didn't need the gods to make birds meaningful. They had dirt, weather, and consequence. You pass an old shepherd sitting alone on a low stool, cloak wrapped tightly around him. His flock is out of sight, presumably asleep or chewing whatever nocturnal snacks sheep prefer. He looks up at you, squints, and says, "Heard it too, didn't you? From the north. That's birth." He says it with quiet certainty, like someone who's lived too many years to question his own lore. Moments later, you pass another man at the fountain, sipping water. You tell him what the shepherd said. He snorts and spits. "Birth? Please." That call was a death cry if I've ever heard one. You glance back at the shepherd. He shrugs. You realize this has likely been their argument for 20 years. Historians still argue whether rural owl beliefs predated or evolved alongside urban ones. Some point to Mycenaean pottery that depicts owls in odd, almost fearful contexts, curled beside sick figures or looming over collapsed harvest scenes. Others argue those interpretations are modern projections, born from pattern-seeking scholars desperate to attach weight to everything. But if there's one thing the countryside added to the owl mythos, it was fear. Not fear like you'd fear a lion or a war drum, but the quiet, creeping dread of not knowing what the bird was trying to say. You step beside a vine-covered wall and find a painted clay tablet nailed into the wood. The image is crude, but clear, and all perched on a broken cartwheel. The message is as much a warning as a memory. My uncle heard one cry, a voice behind you says, and the axle cracked the next day. A woman stands in the doorway behind you, arms folded, not smiling. And did it cry before the wheel cracked? You ask. She nods. 2 days before. He ignored it. We still talk about it. You thank her. She doesn't respond. Further uphill, a trio of village children cluster near a low wall, whispering a rhyme about owls with twisted necks. You recognize it faintly. The lines change from town to town, but the idea is the same. If the owl spins its head too far, it sees death behind you. It's the kind of bedtime story that ensures no child actually sleeps. One of them notices you and asks, "Do you know what it means when it lands twice?" You admit you don't. It means a lie was told today. And someone's gonna find out. You walk on, amused and slightly unsettled. In the countryside, the owl wasn't a mascot, it was a mirror. It reflected what people feared, or hoped for, or tried to ignore. Which, if you think about it, is exactly what wisdom does. You pass a fig orchard, quiet now but thick with the scent of summer fruit. A low hoot cuts the air, not the sharp screech from earlier, but a gentler, fuller note. You stop. Listen. Then smile. Maybe the country owl has a different dialect. Some scholars argue that even within ancient texts, there's a tension between urban reverence and rural wariness. Plays written for city audiences show owls as clever and noble. But in surviving folk songs and peasant stories, the owl often brings illness or secrets. Both views can be true. Both often were. And tonight, both follow you up this winding road, where each hoot might be a blessing or a dare. But for now, in the cooling air and the quiet hum of trees, it simply feels like company. The slope levels off as you reach a quiet ridge above the city. The air up here is thinner, and the stars sit just a little closer, like patient watchers draped in velvet. You turn to look down, and there's Athens, sprawled out in flickering torchlight, the curves of its streets glowing like constellations made of stone and story. You sit for a while beneath a squat olive tree, the bark twisted and familiar. A silver tetradrachm rests in your palm, cool and comforting. The owl is there, engraved in the center, poised and sharp, its feathers rendered with lines so fine they seem to move if you squint. This coin has passed through hundreds of hands, merchants, soldiers, priests, and maybe even someone who once wondered the same thing you do now. Was the owl lucky, or was it simply everywhere? The owl on the coin isn't random. It's not decoration. It was chosen deliberately to represent the strength and spirit of Athens. Wisdom, yes, but also vigilance, and a little bit of menace. A creature that doesn't sleep when others do, that sees in the dark, that moves in silence until it doesn't. An apt metaphor for a city always thinking, watching, defending. But not everyone loved the owl coin. In some outlying regions, people scratched out the image before using it, too much superstition, too much judgment in those wide eyes. There's even one recorded case of a colony trying to mint their own version of the tetradrachm with another bird. A dove, maybe. It didn't catch on. Historians still argue whether the choice of the owl was purely symbolic or also tactical. Some suggest the image was meant to intimidate, not just we're wise, but we see you, even in the dark. Others believe it was a marketing masterstroke, branding the city with a bird that had already carved its niche into popular consciousness. Whether or not the average citizen believed in owl magic, they carried one in their pocket every day. You turn the coin over in your hand. On the reverse, Athena's face stares back, serene and severe. She and the owl, inseparable in art and belief. A matched pair, a divine duo. If Athena embodied wisdom, then the owl was her whisper, her shadow, her messenger on the breeze. You tuck the coin away and stretch your legs. Down the hill, a traveler passes with a lantern, and the faint jangle of metal follows him, coins in a purse, perhaps, or charms hanging from his belt. He stops briefly to tie a sandal and glances up. You hear it? He asks, like it's obvious. You nod. Then you'll sleep well tonight, he says. And walks on. His words surprise you. Sleep well? That's not what most owl omens suggest. But it's a reminder, meaning is flexible. For every warning, there's a comfort. For every shriek in the night, someone somewhere hears a lullaby. Back at the tree, you pick up a small fallen olive. It's underripe, bitter on the tongue, but satisfying to roll between your fingers. You imagine some priest in the old days sitting just like this, olive in one hand, coin in the other, trying to decide what to tell the crowd about the owl sighting that morning. Was it a sign of peace? Of war? Or just a bird looking for breakfast? Beneath the tree, someone scratched a phrase into the stone. Faint, but still legible. The owl sees. It does not speak. That is for us. It's unclear who wrote it. Could have been a child, a dreamer, or a cynic. But the idea lingers. The owl doesn't define its cry. It just makes it. And humans, restless meaning makers that we are, fill in the blanks. The stars press lower now, and the city fades beneath a soft fog of sleep and distance. You lie back on the earth, one hand still brushing the engraved edge of the coin. Above you, a shape glides across the sky, silent, sure, and unmistakably winged. The owl doesn't cry this time. Just sails past, as if it knows you've heard enough for one night. You wake, or maybe you never quite fell asleep, beneath the olive tree, the scent of night still clinging to your clothes like incense from a forgotten ritual. A new sound filters in now, not the owl's call, but voices, muffled and theatrical, drifting up from somewhere down the slope. You follow the sound and soon find yourself standing behind a weathered column at the edge of a modest temple courtyard. A few oil lamps flicker against the marble, casting golden halos onto the faces of a group of temple attendants deep in debate. Their topic? Owls, of course. Or more specifically, whether the temple's resident owl, who'd recently taken up permanent residence in the rafters, had saved the city from disaster, or simply refused to leave. You lean against the wall, blending in. One priest, middle-aged and balding, insists that when the owl flew through the inner sanctuary during last week's storm, it was a divine sign. It circled the altar 3 times. 3! Exactly the number of times Athena is invoked in the prayer of protection. He gestures dramatically, nearly knocking over a basket of figs. Another priestess sighs and shakes her head. It was trapped, she says. You left the shutters open. The poor thing panicked. It knocked over a brazier. Her tone is dry, but not unkind. You get the feeling they've had this conversation more than once. The youngest among them, barely 20, with ink-stained fingers, quietly adds, still, the fire didn't spread. Maybe that means something. The others go quiet for a moment, just long enough for an owl to cry once, far off in the distance, as if casting the deciding vote. You slip away before the debate resumes, stepping through a cracked archway and back into the silent dark. Historians still argue whether temple owls were viewed as true omens or merely tolerated residents. Some temples encouraged them. Others considered them disruptive. In one account, a high priest actually had the sanctuary owl relocated after it defecated on an offering bowl. The official reason was avian uncleanliness. The unofficial reason was probably deep personal offense. Outside the temples, though, owl stories were even more theatrical. You hear one now as you walk past a woman selling pressed oils near the entrance to a garden shrine. She tells another customer about how a sacred owl flew over the city the night before the Persians retreated. It was Athena, watching, she says reverently. Her wings were stars. The man she's speaking to nods, but not too convincingly. You duck into the garden shrine and notice a tiny alcove where offerings have been left, bits of bread, a ceramic owl with one eye chipped, and a scroll tied with red thread. You don't open it, but you imagine it holds a prayer or a question. Something small and sacred. The owl cries again, short and hoarse. Somewhere near the altar. Or maybe beyond. The acoustics are hard to read here. You glance around, half expecting the bird to be perched on a statue, looking smug. You recall a temple tale about a high festival where, at the exact moment a priest called out Athena's name, and all swooped over the crowd. The people gasped. Women clutched their necklaces. Men dropped to one knee. And a baker in the back shouted, "I told you!" No one knows what he meant, but his bakery did very well after that. It's easy to see why temples embraced the owl when it was convenient, and rolled their eyes when it wasn't. A crying owl during a funeral? Divine affirmation of the deceased soul. An owl pooping on the priest's robe? Definitely not a sign. Just a bird. Just coincidence. Still, it's comforting to think that something so small could hold meaning. In a city ruled by philosophy and politics and war, there was always room for one more mystery. You sit on the steps of the garden shrine, legs stretched, palms warm against the sun-worn stone. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine the owl above, just beyond sight, perched in the rafters of the temple, deciding whether or not to screech. Deciding what moment it wants to immortalize next. And all around you, people wait. Priests, bakers, scribes, mothers, children, waiting not for a sermon or a decree, but for a noise in the night that might, possibly, just maybe, mean something more than noise. The steps grow warm beneath you, the kind of warmth that sinks through cloth and skin and bones, making you briefly forget the hour. But then, another owl cry. This one closer, sharper, bouncing between the marble walls like a pebble in a jar. You open your eyes, and just ahead, a figure leans against a low plinth, chalk in hand, scratching something onto its surface. You approach and see it's not a priest or a poet, but what you'd generously call an amateur ornithologist, though the term didn't quite exist yet. He's older, draped in a robe with more holes than seams, and his beard is braided in a way that suggests he gave up explaining it years ago. Beside him lies a small clay tablet, covered in scratches that look suspiciously like bird silhouettes. He sees you and gestures with a flourish. Charting owl flights, he says, as though this is the most natural thing in the world. North last night. West tonight. South 3 nights ago. Coincidence? I think not. You smile and nod, because you've learned by now that in ancient Athens, coincidence was practically a form of heresy. So what does West mean, you ask? Unresolved questions, he says, eyes gleaming. Wanderings. Arguments that need finishing. Or, he scratches behind his ear, just a shift in wind. Scholars still debate the implications. You glance at his markings, lines, dots, small annotations like cried twice or flew low, and realize you're looking at a primitive map of emotion as much as behavior. He's not just following owls. He's tracking meaning. That ever-slippery fish. As you turn to leave, he calls after you, don't trust the ones that circle. You raise a hand in thanks, half hoping that warning was metaphorical. Further down the lane, you pass another man, younger, better dressed, and sitting cross-legged in the doorway of a closed tavern. He's drawing too, but his sketches are caricatures. One owl wears a laurel crown. Another sports a toga and holds a scroll labeled policy. A third has an exaggerated frown and stands over a tiny stick figure city in flames. He looks up and grins. It's satire, he says. Or prophecy. Hard to tell these days. Owls had become more than birds to the people of Athens. They were like horoscopes with wings. Everyone had an interpretation, and few of them agreed. Yet no one seemed eager to dismiss them entirely. Historians still argue whether these owl trackers were taken seriously or merely humored, like beloved eccentrics who gave the city texture. Some scrolls suggest there were even informal gatherings where people compared owl sightings and attempted to outpredict one another. Like a fantasy league, but for divine bird behavior. You reach a public square now, empty save for a few benches and a man trying to balance on one leg for reasons unclear. An owl glides overhead, its wings silent as secrets. He watches it pass, then promptly switches legs. You don't ask. Nearby, an older woman sorts herbs under a shaded awning. Saw that one yesterday, she says without looking up. It flew into my neighbor's garden. He broke his tooth on an olive pit this morning. She says it like she's filing away evidence. A boy beside her listens wide-eyed. Do owls cuss things? He asks. She shrugs. They know things. That's worse. The boy looks up toward the rooftops, his expression part wonder, part terror. You remember being that age, when every rustle held potential, and birds might be messengers or spies. Athens was a good city for that kind of imagining. You stroll toward the edge of the square, where a line of trees shades a row of benches. Someone scratched another owl onto the wood. This one is smiling. Well, smirking. You can't tell if it's playful or sinister. Maybe both. Probably both. It hits you that in all this owl watching, this tracking, interpreting, theorizing, not once has anyone asked what the owl wants. It's not a question the Greeks often asked. The owl was a symbol, a sign, a sentence waiting to be read. What it wanted was irrelevant. It was there to be understood, or misunderstood, or debated. And in the margins of scrolls and corners of conversations, The owl flapped its wings and carried meaning without permission. You sit a moment, and another owl cry slices the quiet. Short, low, like a footnote. You imagine someone, somewhere, scribbling it down, attaching it to tomorrow's forecast or someone's fate. It's all very uncertain. But somehow, the uncertainty makes the city feel alive. You rise slowly from the bench, knees cracking in that gentle reminder that even restful wandering adds up, and continue past the edge of the square. The road narrows again, flanked now by simple homes and modest courtyards. It's quieter here, no lectures, no chalk-wielding philosophers or birdwatchers. Just a hush. But the owl's presence lingers, not through feathers or flight, but in the oldest way myths pass on, stories whispered to children before bed. You stop at the low wall of a modest home where a soft yellow glow spills from the window. Inside, a nursemaid sits near a cot, her voice hushed, melodic. You can't hear every word, but her tone is unmistakable. A lullaby. About owls. You lean closer, careful not to interrupt. Her song flows like warm oil, slow and drowsy. Little owl with golden eyes, watch us while the daylight dies. Hoot not twice, or else beware. The night may bring more than cool air. You smile. It's simple, childlike, but it carries echoes of all the fears and comforts that have wrapped around owls for generations. In one version, the owl watches over sleeping children. In another, it punishes the disobedient. The moral depends on the parent's mood, and how many olives were spilled that day. You remember, vaguely, an account from a Roman traveler who had passed through Attica centuries later. He recorded hearing Greek children warn not to look an owl in the eye too long, lest your secrets escape your mouth. A charming idea, if you're into avian lie detectors. Inside the house, the child finally drifts off, thumb curled near a linen doll. The nursemaid hums the last note and extinguishes the lamp. Darkness folds gently over the room like a blanket. Nothing more than getting a toddler to sleep before the figs burned. Around another corner, an old man rocks slowly in a creaky chair. He notices you and waves lazily. You're following the owl too? He asks without a trace of irony. You nod. My mother used to say, he continues, that owls carry dreams from house to house. That's why you should never shout at one. It might drop your dream in someone else's garden. He chuckles. Which explains how my neighbor married rich. It's a good line. You tell him so. He shrugs. Could be true. Could be a story. Makes the night go faster. That's the heart of it, really. These tales, soft as thread, passed from tongue to ear, are more than just filler for a restless child's mind. They're survival tools for the imagination. They make fear feel manageable. They turn a loud, jarring cry in the dark into something a child can sing back to sleep. And when those children grow older, they don't forget the stories. They pass them on. Maybe dressed up as omens. Maybe turned into fables about honesty or caution. But always with the owl at the center, quiet, strange, unknowable. You pass one last house, where a child has drawn a chalk owl on the wall near the gate. This one is smiling. Big round eyes, wings wide, and what appears to be a cookie in one claw. Interpretations vary. As the wind picks up again, the owl cries out, once, twice, cutting through the calm like a lullaby's final note. Somewhere behind you, a window shutter shut. You pause under an arch and let the silence settle. No footsteps, no laughter, no argument. Just the night, and the faint memory of a song about a bird that knows more than it says. Maybe tonight, it's just a story. But that's more than enough. You move through the still streets with the ease of someone no longer surprised by owls or opinions. The moon has climbed higher now, casting its silver sheen across the rooftops, and the last flickers of torches down in the agora sputter and dim. Athens isn't asleep, not fully, but it's yawning, stretching, and slipping under the first folds of rest. You round a bend and spot him before he spots you, an older man hunched on a crate near the colonnade of a small amphora shop. He's squinting at the sky through a loop of bronze wire he's fashioned into a sort of viewing lens. Not for stars. For owls. You're late, he says without looking. It flew east 20 minutes ago. You join him on the low step beside a stack of dusty jugs. He finally turns and gives you the once-over. You have the look of someone who thinks he's not superstitious. But you're out here, aren't you? You admit he has a point. He gestures upward. The owl always flies east when the grain's about to go bad. Or when someone's hiding a secret. He leans in. And tonight, I'd bet on both. It turns out, He's one of several self-appointed owl monitors in the agora. Not priests, not philosophers. Just regular citizens who chart bird flights the way others track clouds or political rumors. We're watchers, he says proudly, tapping a small scroll he's tucked under his arm. People laugh, sure. But when the owl changes direction 3 nights in a row, suddenly they want to borrow your notes. Historians still argue whether these amateur owl watchers were truly respected or merely tolerated. Some scholars suggest they were informal omensmiths, local interpreters of the unexplained, especially popular with bakers, potters, and stall owners who wanted a reason not to open shop the next morning. As he unrolls the scroll to show you his system, you're genuinely impressed. Columns marked with tiny drawings, wing position, cry length, time of night, moon phase. It looks like a mix between a weather chart and a riddle. You know the big lie? He whispers conspiratorially. That owls are always wise. No one talks about the loud ones. The clumsy ones. One crashed into my neighbor's laundry line last week. Spooked the goat. Nearly started a fire. You try to suppress a laugh. He shrugs. Doesn't mean it wasn't a sign. Just, not a graceful one. A few steps away, a younger man is carving something into the side of a crate with a bit of broken pottery. It's another owl. This one has spirals for eyes and a long beak that curls downward. Not anatomically accurate, but expressive. I saw it turn its head all the way around, he says to no one in particular. Twice. Then it blinked. That's prophecy. Or indigestion, the older man mutters beside you. There's a quiet joy in all of this, not just in the owl's presence, but in the web of interpretations it spins. The way it gives people something to talk about, to assign meaning to dispute. The owl isn't just a bird. It's a question. A sentence that starts with "Did you hear?" and rarely ends with agreement. You rise and begin to walk again, past shuttered stalls and empty benches. A breeze swirls a bit of parchment across the street. As you pick it up, you realize it's a scrap from someone's owl journal. A note scrawled quickly, late cry. West. Felt wrong? That question mark says everything. You tuck it into your belt and move on, thinking about how comforting it must be to log mysteries, even if you never solve them. Maybe especially then. Above you, faint wing beats stir the air. You don't even look anymore, you just know. The street bends once more, this time leading into a cluttered row of night stalls, half-packed and mostly abandoned, save for a single flickering torch and the unmistakable scent of burnt time. You catch the movement just in time, a man pulling a canvas tarp over his wares, careful, but not discreet. Something flashes in the lamplight. A bundle of feathers. You slow your pace, curiosity piqued, and circle around a column to watch. The man looks both ways, then sets out a row of what appear to be all feathers, some small, some enormous, some suspiciously striped. A boy approaches. Coins clink. The man leans in. Real, he says. Sacred owl. From the North Hills. Screeched twice during a festival. The boy gawks. Guarantees good luck on tests. Or love. Or crops. Depends on your need. You step closer, and he spots you. You look like someone who appreciates divine favors, he offers, smiling too widely. He picks up a particularly fluffy feather. This one? Flew over a wedding and a funeral in the same hour. Balance. You raise an eyebrow. That looks like a chicken feather. He does not flinch. Only to the untrained eye. Historians still argue whether the feather trade was ever officially sanctioned, or just one of many gray markets that sprang up around owl lore. There's no surviving law banning owl feather sales outright, but at least 2 comic plays and 1 surviving potsherd mock feather fraud, suggesting it was rampant enough to be funny. The boy buys a bundle and walks off proudly, feather tucked behind his ear. You can't help but smile. Whether or not it came from an owl, the belief is real, and belief, especially the hopeful kind, tends to outweigh taxonomy. You chat with the seller a bit more. He has a whole catalog of explanations. Feathers collected during a full moon? Double potency. Left wing feathers? Better for luck. Right wing? Health. You ask about tail feathers. He grins. You don't want to know. You lead him to his business and continue through the stall lane, where other vendors sell charms, tiny owls carved into bone, painted onto scraps of linen, etched into bronze pins. Some claim to bless crops. Others claim to reveal lies. One promises to neutralize bad owls, a phrase that raises several questions and 0 answers. A man selling wine nods at you as you pass. That all-feather man? Don't trust him. He once glued turkey fluff to a sparrow's spine and called it divine. You laugh, and he waves his cup. But then again, maybe it worked. Who knows? He takes another sip. That's the thing, no one really knows. And that's part of the charm. The owl's mystery was lucrative, open to interpretation, trade, even light fraud. All wrapped in a flutter of feathers and just enough plausible magic to make you look twice. You pause by a fountain, now just a trickle, and watch a feather float by, small, gray, and utterly ambiguous. A child snatches it from the water and holds it up like treasure. See, she shouts to her friend. Now I'll pass my math lesson. You smile. Maybe she will. Maybe the owl's blessing doesn't care where the feather came from. Maybe it's enough that she believes it. Just then, another owl cry tears across the rooftops. The vendors look up. Some shrug. Others knock twice on wood. One woman crosses herself with her left hand, muttering something about her cousin's neighbor's goat. You walk on, past a graffiti scrawl that reads, "Owl lied. I failed my exam." Below it, someone else has added, "You studied for 1 hour." Don't blame the bird. The trade in owl feathers may have been full of tricks, but the belief behind it? That ran deep. Deeper than feathers, deeper than coin. And as you move away from the stalls, the city softens behind you, and the night breathes in that curious way again, half watching, half smiling. Like an owl. You move past the outer rim of the marketplace and into a quieter, more stoic part of town, the civic quarter of Thebes, where the streets are broader, the stones newer, and the buildings were the kind of seriousness only bureaucracy can provide. It's cleaner here. Still. But something feels off. You overhear the whispers before you see the sign. They ban owls. You blink. You must have misheard. But then you round a corner and come upon a freshly painted notice nailed to a city board. Any owl nesting within city walls shall be removed. Repeated sightings to be reported. A boy stands nearby, tossing a pebble at the base of the board. They think the harvest failed because of the owls, he says, deadpan. Not the drought. Not the worm blight. Just the birds. He shrugs. Whatever keeps the meeting short, I guess. It's true. Thebes, never as fond of owl symbolism as Athens, had become the one Greek city-state known to officially outlaw the birds, at least for a time. Historians still argue whether the so-called owl ban was driven by superstition, politics, or good old-fashioned scapegoating. After 3 years of poor yields, high taxes, and mysterious illness, someone had to take the blame. The owls? Wrong place, wrong time. You stroll past a stoic public square where men in robes whisper beneath statues. One holds a scroll, the other clutches a carved cornucopia. No owls here, no carvings, no feathers, no graffiti. Just heavy symbolism, all of it grounded and stern. A woman mutters under her breath, "They took a nest off the courthouse yesterday. Just flung it." Her voice trembles with anger or awe, you can't tell which. Further down the colonnade, you spot an overturned crate and a smashed oil lamp. "They thought it was a nest," says a nearby merchant, lowering his voice. "Just shadows and straw. Still knocked it down. Nearly lit the shop on fire." You ask if anyone actually saw an owl during the harvest season. He shakes his head. But someone heard one. That's usually enough. You wander further, stopping at the edge of a dry garden where a teacher speaks softly to a group of children. "Now remember," she says, "owls may seem wise in Athens, but here we must question appearances. What seems sacred may simply be a distraction." Her tone is gentle but firm, and the children nod solemnly, as if someone just told them cake is unreliable. Still, something about this whole ban feels off. Fear doesn't usually stick this cleanly unless it's useful. Maybe the owl was a scapegoat, sure. But maybe it was also a political maneuver, clear the skies to make room for a new kind of symbol. A different bird. A different god. You find a crumpled leaflet near a closed bathhouse. It's hand-scrawled and anonymous. They chase the owl, but the rot remains. Pluck the feathers, and still the fields sleep. Poetic. Dangerous. You tuck it into your belt. Not everyone agrees with the ban. Behind a shuttered stall, you spot a small clay owl tucked in the corner, facing the wall, hidden from view. A woman sees you notice and quickly turns it around. "For my mother," she explains. "She liked them. Said they keep secrets." You nod. Secrets indeed. The owl ban didn't last forever. Records show it faded after a particularly heavy rain revived the crops, and the blame shifted elsewhere, bad stone in the granaries, according to one account. But for a while, the city treated silence as policy, and feathers as threat. And even now, as you leave the civic square behind, the quiet feels heavier. As if the owls are still here, perched on the rooflines, waiting. Just not welcome. You glance over your shoulder. The street is empty. But a soft screech breaks the hush anyway, distant and defiant. One call. From the outskirts. A reminder. You smile. The owls may have been banned, but they were never gone. You descend into a livelier part of town now, where the air grows heavier with the scent of wine, charcoal, and last-minute regret. This is the tavern district, where debates are louder, logic is looser, and owls are just as likely to inspire a toast as they are a table flip. The streets narrow into alleys thick with laughter and slurred philosophy. You pass a taverna where the sign over the door is shaped, unsurprisingly, like an owl's head, stylized, exaggerated, one eye squinting like it knows too much. Beneath it, a group of patrons are mid-argument, wine cups raised like weapons, their voices bouncing off stone. You're wrong, shouts one man, slapping the table for emphasis. The owl brings passion. I heard it the night I met my wife. Then she left you 2 years later, his friend fires back. Clearly it was not an endorsement. Or maybe it was warning me, the first man mutters, staring dramatically into his cup. You slip inside and take a seat near the wall. The owner, a woman with arms like tree trunks and a laugh that could rattle a shield, recognizes you as a traveler and brings you a clay mug without asking. Tonight's house wine, she says, named after the owl that interrupted my third wedding. You raise an eyebrow. It landed on the altar, she explains. Stared at the groom. We broke up a week later. Best omen I ever got. Around the room, others chime in with their own owl tales. One woman swears she got pregnant after an owl landed on her windowsill. My husband says it was the wine, she adds, but I know better. Another claims the owl's cry cost him a winning wrestling bet. A third insists her bakery's sourdough starter only rises when owl perches nearby. I don't make the rules, she says with a shrug. Historians still argue whether tavern owl tales were genuine beliefs or just convenient excuses. Owl equals fate? Owl equals misstep? Owl equals winged alibi? All three interpretations probably occurred in equal amounts, depending on who was listening and how much they'd had to drink. Your host returns, leans in. You know what I think, she says, quieter now. Owls don't mean love or war. They mean change. Good or bad, they shake things loose. People don't fear the owl, they fear what comes next. You nod. That tracks. In a culture that praised logic but lived in poetry, owls sat at the crossroads, stubborn, feathery punctuation marks in the sentences of fate. A poet in the corner raises his cup and slurs into the dark. Owl in the rafters, watching with glee. Did you cry for her, or just laugh at me? A smattering of applause follows. Someone weeps into a fig tart. Outside, you hear another owl cry, close, sharp, and perfectly timed with someone knocking over a wine jug. That's a sign, a man shouts. A sign I've had enough. He falls over. You step outside again, where the noise dims but doesn't disappear. The tavern glow fades behind you, and the street stretches out under a crescent moon. A man stumbles past muttering, "Owls ruin my life," before immediately tripping on his own sandal. The truth is, no part of Greek society was off limits to the owl's influence. In temples, it was sacred. In homes, a bedtime story. And in taverns, it was a scapegoat, a muse, a myth, a joke, and, sometimes, all at once. You walk on, full from wine and stories, the echoes of laughter and wing beats lingering in the corners of the night. Whatever the owl meant, love, disaster, luck, or loss, it gave people something to point to. Something to blame, toast, or weep for. And really, isn't that all we ever want from a symbol? The laughter fades as you leave the tavern quarter, and the streets stretch out quieter again, cooler now, with a breeze that smells faintly of crushed rosemary and last night's rain. You pass an alley choked with vines and step into a wide square dimly lit by torches wedged into brass sconces. Ahead, rhythmic drum beats rise in the distance, light at first, but growing with each step you take. The Dionysian festival is underway. You can tell by the music first, then by the fluttering of bright fabrics and the strange silhouettes dancing just beyond the torchlight, bodies twisting, leaping, moving not with grace exactly, but with something older than grace. Something ritualistic. Something messy. You get closer, and it hits you, owl masks. Dozens of them. Some carved from wood, others painted onto faces, a few clearly made last minute from sackcloth and stubborn confidence. The eyes on each are exaggerated, huge, ringed in black or gold, some cross-eyed, some blinking too much, some with lashes drawn in so thickly they look like false prophets. A man in a half-broken owl mask stumbles by, feathers falling off as he mimes a solemn bow to a fig tree. A group of dancers hoot in unison, then erupt into shrieks of laughter and something that might be either prophecy or hiccups. You find a seat on a low wall and observe. No one here is debating symbolism. No one's quoting Aristotle. This is something older, wilder. The owl isn't being revered or feared. It's being worn, imitated, parroted, worshipped by accident, maybe. A woman twirls past, holding a jug above her head and shouting, 3 cries. 1 drink for each, before spinning out of view. Historians still argue whether these festival owl masks were meant to mock the sacred bird or celebrate it. Some point to vase paintings that depict similar masks with captions like Messenger of Madness. Others insist they were part of a symbolic shedding of roles. By donning the owl, revelers could release their inner chaos. Or maybe they just liked how the masks looked under torchlight. You spot one reveler perched on a windowsill, arms tucked like wings, head tilted all the way sideways. "I see all," he caws. "I understand nothing." His friends cheer. Someone tosses a date at him. A child tugs at your robe, pointing excitedly at the dancers. "That's the Owl King," she says, indicating a tall man in a mask with golden feathers and a flowing purple sash. He twirls, dramatically, hoots like a trumpet, and then immediately slips on a grape. "He sees our sins and forgives our clumsiness," she adds, helpfully. You ask her what the owl means. She thinks for a long moment, squinting into the revelers. Then, it means we're watching each other. And also that we're all kind of ridiculous. Not bad for 6 years old. You wander among the dancers, the music lifting and pulsing like a heartbeat just beneath the skin. Someone hands you a mask, owl-shaped, paper-thin, painted silver. You don't argue. You put it on. And suddenly the world changes. You're no longer just a visitor. You're part of the myth. The mask limits your vision, but heightens your hearing. The owl cries are everywhere now, real ones from the trees above, and human imitations bouncing from mouth to mouth, some earnest, some absurd. And between them, you feel it, the myth breathing. Not as a dusty relic or a temple icon, but as something alive. Someone claps. Someone shrieks. Someone begins a chant that might once have been a prayer, now warped into rhyme and rhythm. Eyes that see through masks and lies. All above, all wise. Speak no truth, and none deny. Just let the bird decide. It's nonsense. And also not. The line between reverence and satire blurs here, in the dust and drums. The owl becomes everyone's mirror, sacred, silly, dangerous, divine. It can mean what you want it to mean, because no one knows what it means anymore. Which, if you think about it, is the most owl-like truth of all. You remove the mask slowly, gently, as if waking from a fever dream, or maybe just a nap wrapped in feathers and flute music. The laughter and chanting recede behind you, muffled by distance and the soft hush of stone alleys that twist away from the Dionysian madness like threads slipping off a loom. The street you find yourself on now is almost too quiet. No music, no drums, no echoes of wine-soaked wisdom. Just the faint scrape of your sandals and the occasional soft breeze. And in that stillness, you start to notice the details again, the way the moonlight paints the walls, the subtle scent of warm olives drifting from a closed window, the distinct hush that suggests someone is watching, even if no one's there. You pass a doorway with a small bronze plaque, faint, weathered, but still legible. Platonos Oikia. Plato's house, or so the story goes. Probably a reconstruction. Maybe even a mistake. But it makes you pause all the same. Inside the courtyard, a tree grows sideways, olive or fig, it's hard to tell in the moonlight. And perched on one of its branches is a statue. Not Athena, not some dramatic hero, just a stone owl, wings tucked, eyes forward. You stare at it, wondering. Because Plato, despite being the poster child for reason and form in metaphysical ideals, owned an owl. His students wrote about it. A particularly noisy one, according to some. Aglossa, they called it, meaning tongueless, which is almost certainly ironic, because the bird was famously loud and deeply inconvenient. There's a story that during one of his lectures, the owl let out a screech so piercing it caused a student to drop his stylus in fright. Plato paused, looked at the owl, and said, "Even wisdom tires of silence." Which is either brilliant or something he definitely didn't say, depending on which scholar you ask. Historians still argue whether Plato genuinely valued the owl as a symbol of intellect, or simply kept it around because of its association with Athena and the Athenian identity. After all, his works rarely mention the bird directly. And yet, the owl appears carved into the corners of his academy's later buildings, perched quietly on the margins, as if listening in. You sit on a low bench beside the garden and watch the statue. It doesn't move, obviously, but you can't help imagining Aglossa flying from branch to branch, interrupting lectures, mocking Socratic dialogue with a well-timed screech. A student once wrote that the owl seemed to call only when a question remained unanswered, which, considering the state of philosophy, meant it called constantly. You pick up a pebble and roll it in your fingers. You think about Plato's endless pursuit of ideal forms, truth, justice, beauty, and wonder where the owl fits in. Maybe the bird was a metaphor. Or maybe it was just loud. Maybe it didn't need to represent anything. Maybe its purpose was to break the seriousness. Ad mesta method. Remind even the deepest thinkers that not all answers come in scrolls. Or hoots, for that matter. You leave the courtyard and stroll past the outer wall, where someone scratched a familiar phrase. Even Plato had to shush his owl. You chuckle. The quote's probably fake, but it feels true. A gust of wind rushes through the alley. You look up, instinct now, and catch sight of a real owl gliding silently overhead. It doesn't cry, just vanishes between rooftops, as if it never wanted to be seen. You wonder, in that moment, whether Plato's owl ever flew away, or whether it simply outlasted the lectures, settled into legend, and became part of the architecture. You reach the end of the alley, where it opens again to the curve of the city. The Acropolis glows softly in the distance. The owl, wherever it is, says nothing. But you hear it anyway. The city seems softer now, as if wrapped in linen. The roads wind gently downward from Plato's shadows, through neighborhoods that hum not with wisdom or wine, but the slow breath of sleeping houses. You keep walking, slower now, like your feet have finally realized what hour it is. But the owl's legend isn't done with you yet. Ahead, near the city's southern edge, a caravan has pulled into a quiet square, horses snorting, torches sputtering, travelers murmuring in low tones. They've just arrived from a distant port, their carts piled high with amphorae and bolts of cloth. You linger near a stacked basket of oranges and hear the tail end of a boast. We brought him an owl. Not a statue. A real one. The speaker is middle-aged, wrapped in merchant's robes, and currently basking in the attention of half a dozen listeners. Not for eating, he clarifies. For gifting. Foreign king. Eastern lands. Richer than a temple. They don't have owls there. Not like ours. Someone asks, and what did he do with it? The merchant smiles. Put it in a golden cage. Said it would bring wisdom to his court. He shrugs. 2 days later it escaped, flew straight into a pillar. Dead. Silence. Then laughter. You should have brought 2, someone says. One for wisdom. One to read the floor plan. They laugh again, but underneath the humor, there's a shared respect. The idea of gifting an owl, an Athenian owl, to a foreign king wasn't just clever. It was status. Like delivering a piece of the Parthenon in feathered form. Historians still argue whether these owl gifts were genuine acts of diplomacy or clever ways to unload noisy cargo. At least one preserved letter from an ambassador references this sacred bird, whose eyes do not blink, though whether he meant that poetically or in frustration is unclear. You walk quietly among the carts, listening as another merchant recounts an attempt to smuggle owl feathers through a Spartan checkpoint. They thought it was sorcery, he chuckles. Made me eat one to prove I wasn't a prophet. You glance at the cages. No owls tonight, just geese and a goat that looks deeply unimpressed. But you imagine the scene, some royal court far away, gaping as this gray-feathered, head-turning oddity screeches its way into history. Whether it died quickly or lived long enough to confuse the local priesthood, it had done its job, it had meant something. And maybe that was enough. You pass a group of tired guards seated on overturned crates. One is fiddling with a wooden token shaped like an owl. He rolls it between his fingers like a worry stone. You ask if it's from Athens. Delos, he says. But made in Athens. My daughter gave it to me before this trip. He doesn't elaborate, but the way he holds it suggests the rest of the story isn't for strangers. You nod and keep walking. Behind you, the merchants argue about which bird makes the best diplomatic gift. Someone suggests peacocks. Someone else says swans. One man yells, crows are smarter than owls, and is immediately pelted with an orange. But the owl had the better brand. It was portable, recognizable, mysterious. It could represent intellect, war, city pride, or a well-timed omen, depending on the need. Even in failure, even crashing into a wall, it left an impression. People didn't forget the owl. They built myths around it, turned its silence into statements, its cry into prophecy. You leave the square and head toward the shadow of the southern wall, where the wind smells of distant seas and future departures. You wonder how many owls left Athens this way, boxed in straw, tucked beside olive oil jars, traveling toward palaces and pyramids and cities without names. Some survived. Some didn't. But each one carried the same thing, the weight of human expectation. You pause and look up. The stars above shift ever so slightly, and from the edge of the wall, you hear the soft flutter of wings. Then, for just a heartbeat, a shape crosses the moon, a brief eclipse with feathers and fate. The owl doesn't cry. It doesn't have to. Its presence is the message. The air by the wall is cooler now, touched by the sea and threaded with salt. The horizon glows faintly, not from sunrise, not yet, but from 1,000 city lights flickering in their final hour. You walk along the edge of the city where ships are prepared, nets are mended, and decisions are made with one eye on the sky and one ear tuned for wings. It's here, among the ropes and sails, that the owl stories take a turn. You spot a sailor hunched over a knot, mumbling to himself. When he catches you looking, he nods at the mast behind him. Perched atop it is a carving, an owl, of course. Small, wooden, wings tucked, its eyes brighten with wax. She watches the wind, he mutters. Doesn't hoot unless we've forgotten something. You nod, slowly, because at this point you've learned not to question it. Sailors and owls have always had a complicated relationship. On land, owls were symbols of wisdom, sometimes luck, sometimes mischief. But at sea? At sea, they became navigators. Harbingers. Occasionally scapegoats. Another sailor nearby unspools a tale about a voyage to Crete. They heard an owl cry as the ship left harbor, and half the crew took it as a blessing. The other half said it meant they'd turn back empty. 2 weeks later, the ship returned, intact, but with only salted fish to show. No trade deals. No treasure. Split omen, he says with a grin. Just like the crew. Historians still argue whether owl lore at sea was genuinely believed or passed around for morale, something to talk about on long nights between stars and storms. But ship records from multiple ports mention owl sightings in their logs, sometimes right next to wind speed or crew sickness. That's no accident. You pass a low-slung building where a man etches charms into wax discs, each stamped with owl faces. Some are tossed into the sea before voyages. Others are tucked under pillows on hammocks below deck. 1 hoot before departure, he says. Delay your trip. 2, safe to go. 3, don't even untie the rope. You ask what happens if there's no hoot at all. He shrugs. Then it's your choice. Which is worse? Superstition at sea is different than on land. There's no temple to run to, no oracle to consult. Just stars, sails, and whatever wisdom you carry. So when all appears, it matters, because it breaks the silence of the unknown. It says something, even if no one agrees on what. You sit by a pile of coiled rope, watching a young boy adjust a miniature owl carving on the prow of a fishing boat. He's careful with it, like it's sacred, though it's barely longer than his hand. His father calls to him, and he runs off, but not before tapping the owl's head twice. Farther down the docks, an older shipwright tells you of a merchant galley that refused to depart after an owl flew into the sailcloth and became tangled. Some said it was bad luck. Some said Athena was trying to stop them. They stayed docked for 2 nights. On the 3rd, storm blew in. They would have been crushed. You ask what happened to the owl. He smiles sadly. Flew off. Looked back once. Like it knew. Another man, watching the stars, chimes in. They don't guide you like gods. They just show up at the edge of decisions. He taps the side of his head. The omen's not the owl. It's what you make of it. That stays with you. You walk back toward the main path through the harbor, where traders sleep on their carts and dogs bark at nothing. A shape crosses overhead, wings, slow and silent. You glance up just in time to see it disappear behind a grain silo. No cry, no screech, just presence. But still, a nearby sailor makes the sign of the gods on his chest. Even now, even in a city with philosophers on every corner and geometry etched into its temples, the owl remains the moment that logic pauses. The interruption. The glimpse of something you can't quite explain. The sea laps softly at the shore as you stand near the water's edge. The stars blink above. The owl is gone, for now. But its absence feels like a decision waiting to be made. The shoreline path curves gently now, drawing you away from the bustle of ships and back toward the still, sleepy streets on the outskirts of the city. The torchlight is scarce here, just the occasional flicker from a home where someone has trouble sleeping, or perhaps refuses to sleep at all. It's a quiet kind of Athens. Not silent, but listening. You turn down a narrow lane lined with weather-worn columns and moss-covered stone, and suddenly realize, it's been a while since you heard the owl. You pause. You look up. Nothing. This part of town is quieter than the rest. Too quiet, maybe. The kind of quiet that invites legends. And, sure enough, as you reach the edge of a worn stone square, an old man with a lamp appears from the dark, leaning heavily on a crooked staff. "No owls in Sparta," he says, unprompted. You blink. "I'm not in Sparta." He grunts. "They claimed they had none. Ever. Said the bird didn't like them." He chuckles as if that settles it. It's true, in fact, Sparta, the famously laconic and military-driven city-state, was notably absent from the owl obsession that gripped Athens and much of Greece. Historians still argue whether this was because owls genuinely avoided the place, due to geography or prey scarcity, or because Spartan culture had no use for such symbols. You sit beside the man on a crumbling bench and listen as he continues. They didn't allow birds in temples. Thought it distracted from duty, from war, from glory. He spits. "But you know what I saw, once? An owl, perched on a column in Laconia. Quiet. Watching. And a Spartan boy, what did he do? Threw a stone." He shakes his head slowly. "They couldn't let it mean something. That was the risk." Indeed, some scholars suggest Spartans deliberately distanced themselves from symbols like the owl precisely because of Athens' association with it. In a rivalry that stretched through culture, politics, and war, even birds became battlegrounds. You ask him what he thinks it meant, that owl in Laconia. He grins, a mouth mostly missing teeth. Meant something was watching. Whether they liked it or not. You leave him there, still muttering softly to his lamp, and wander farther into the outskirts. You begin to notice the edges of the city give way to something else, something older. Shrines that have crumbled into overgrown gardens. Homes that no longer have doors. And in one such ruin, you pause. There, in the center of a collapsed atrium, stands a stone pedestal. Once it must have held something noble, a bust, a deity, perhaps a bowl for offerings. Now, an owl perches on it. Real. Silent. You freeze. It doesn't move. Just stares at you, tilting its head slowly as if measuring your thoughts. The wind stirs behind you. A distant dog barks. But the owl remains, still as memory. Then it calls. Not loud. Not sharp. Just a single note, low and thoughtful, like a sigh too tired to rise. You stand there for a long moment. Long enough to wonder if this owl had come to fill in the silence left by Sparta's denial. Or maybe it never left. Maybe it had always been here, waiting for someone to notice. It flaps once and disappears into the trees. You exhale. And just like that, the myth breathes again. Not every city embraced the owl. Not every person believed in its messages. But the owl didn't seem to care. It came anyway. Perched where it pleased. Watched who it wanted. Left when it was done. And in doing so, it left traces, in the gaps of history, in the questions still debated, in the empty pedestal where meaning had once sat proudly and now returned with feathers and flight. You begin the walk back to the heart of the city, not expecting to hear the owl again, but also not needing to. Sometimes, it's enough to know it was there. The path winds slowly downhill, bringing you back into the city like a river returning to the sea. The stones beneath your feet feel warmer now, as if they'd held onto the stories from earlier, from centuries ago, from last night's overheard argument about whether two owl cries meant marriage or mildew. Athens rests. Not asleep, not entirely, but resting. You move past familiar places now, a shuttered temple door, the shadow of that crooked fig tree, a faded mural where the owl's wings are half peeled but still watching. There's something different in the way the city breathes now, as if the owl's presence, always nearby, has softened from question to comfort. You find a spot just before the Acropolis gates, a wide stone ledge with a perfect view of the rooftops bathed in moonlight. From here, the world seems quieter. Or maybe you're just quieter inside it. You think back on all the contradictions. The owl that met wisdom in death, that cried over love and disaster, that blessed fishermen and spooked bakers, that symbolized a goddess yet knocked over votive lamps, that inspired philosophy and jokes and forged feathers sold by the cartload. Historians still argue whether the owl was revered or tolerated, whether it was myth first or mascot first, whether its symbolism shaped belief, or if belief simply reached for the nearest winged metaphor. None of them really agree. But tonight, you've walked through every shade of that debate, from temple whispers to drunken chants, feather merchants to ghosted courtyards, clumsy gift owls to mysterious sky gliders. You've heard laughter and silence. You've seen devotion and denial. And through it all, the owl just was. It existed. Loud, watchful, ambiguous. The Greeks filled in the rest. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the owl wasn't meant to mean something. Maybe it was meant to hold space for whatever people needed it to carry: fear, wisdom, longing, warning. It hooted. People listened. And in listening, they revealed themselves. You lean back against the stone, gaze drifting skyward. The stars blink on and off behind soft clouds, and for a moment, just the briefest flicker, you think you see wings again. No cry this time. No screech. Just a faint silhouette passing across the moon. Then nothing. But somehow, that nothing is filled with everything. You close your eyes. So now, as your breathing slows and your thoughts begin to blur at the edges, let the owl fly one last time, away from questions, away from meanings, away even from Athens. Let it sail above you, silent, wings outstretched against the soft hush of night. The stones of the city cool beneath you, still cradling the echo of your steps, still holding the weight of old laughter and older debates. The olive trees murmur gently in the breeze, and the rooftops, once sharp with sound and story, now exhale into stillness. No one argues here anymore. Not the priests, not the fishmongers, not even the poets. The owl, for now, is not a sign or a warning. It's not a symbol or a curse. It's just a shape in the dark, passing quietly between dream and memory. Your limbs grow heavy. Your breath evens out. And in the silence between thoughts, in the hush between heartbeats, you can still feel it, that knowing presence, that ever-watching eye. Not judging, not guiding, just being. The night wraps around you now, gentle and undemanding. Let yourself rest. Let the world become simpler, softer, one slow breath at a time. The owl will keep watch. You don't have to. Sweet dreams.